Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Chris Stokel-Walker.
Thank you very much for joining us here today at GLOBSEC. Really, really grateful to be here, and I'm slightly jealous because I think actually our audience members may have as nice seats as the panelists do in this one room. We're here to talk about the fractured tech stack and the way that the US and China now seem to be at loggerheads over perhaps the most transformational technology that we have currently in the world, AI. And we have a huge, brilliant panel here sort of encapsulating all the views of different parts of the world, from the US, from Europe, from elsewhere. Really keen to discuss that. One little bit of housekeeping, you will see on our side screens here the opportunity to ask questions via Slido. Please do feel free to chip in. We will give you a kind of QR code, there you can see it, to kind of prompt questions. Please do utilize those, because I would love to incorporate your thoughts as well in our discussion. But perhaps we should bring on our participants here for the discussion. So first of all, can I introduce, and please do give a very, very warm welcome to Stuart Adams. And please also welcome Markéta Gregorová. We also have Koray Köse. And we also have joining us Derrick Morgan. So please do welcome all of those on stage. So thank you all for coming along. And it's a really interesting sort of discussion to be having now, because we have obviously going on the debate in London between the US and China over this sort of stuff. I think to start us off, I really want to get a sense, maybe from you, Derrick. Whenever we talk about tech, and I have kind of a decade of experience covering tech, there is a little bit of skepticism, a kind of rolling of the eyes of, well, does this actually matter? I mean, why is this sort of future of AI and the tussle between the US and China and other countries quite so important?
It is, and the other lens to think about this through is the fractured nature of it. So I want to talk about that and then get to the tech as well. I remember my first trip to Eastern Europe was in 2006 with Vice President Dick Cheney. I worked for him, and he gave a major speech at the Vilnius conference. And he spoke there, inviting Russia to join their democratic neighbors and in joining, the Western order. And unfortunately, we've seen over the years President Putin reject that offer. We've seen it in Ukraine, Georgia, unfortunately, Ukraine most recently. And it's clear that not everybody wants to join a peaceful world order. I think we also have to consider that with China as well. For many decades, our country and many of yours have invested in China, have invited China into the world system to respect the rule of law, free trade, fair business dealings, and we've seen that unfortunately rejected as well. And so I think we need to put it into that context and think about why is technology an important piece of that puzzle? Well, you've got certainly the defense aspects. There's been quite a bit of discussion on increasing the NATO and our ability to defend ourselves here in Europe as Western democracies. That's important. Of course, technology, including artificial intelligence, is absolutely central to that. Because of the decentralized nature of warfare, drone warfare, and so forth. AI is going to continue to play a very important role there. You also have the impact on culture and public opinion that AI is going to represent. When you think about nefarious actors wanting to participate in social media conversations and the like, they're going to use AI tools to do that. They're already doing that with bots and whatnot. So that's an important front in that as well. And then you have productivity. So when you combine those three things, a defense system that will work, that will be able to tackle decentralized threats, and when you have the impact on public opinion that technology can have, and then you have productivity tools that allow you to defend your nation and to have a prosperous people, that's why technology is important, and it's unfortunately why we have to talk about a fractured technological space, even though many of us would not like to have that world. That's the world that we live in.
Brilliant. And Markéta, as a member of the European Parliament, I guess we've had it laid out there by Derrick as EVP of the Heritage Foundation, the stakes here. It's interesting, though, that this debate is framed as the US versus China. Why should we in Europe care about all of this?
Thank you for the intriguing question. Why should we care? Because we are still here as Europeans, of course. And although it might occasionally seem as if the train is departing without us, and it has been going on for quite some time, for instance, especially in the AI race, the European Union was not in the picture. We, of course, are still one of the largest economies, one of the largest trading bloc in the world, and with an immense soft power. And very often we don't actually use it because, of course, we don't truly have a single capital market or single market for that. However, I think that currently in the current geopolitical environment, more and more the bigger EU countries are realizing that this really cannot go on as 27 small, very diverse countries, because we are absolutely not competitive. Allow me one example, and I think we will talk today a lot about semiconductors and the fact that, for instance, the EU planned a CHIPS Act, so-called, although there were not really that many incentives. But most of you, probably all of you, have heard of the great Dutch company ASML. And one could say that, well, if we actually had the unified approach, the EU would do everything to protect this excellence in lithography that's unparalleled in the whole world, and not even the Chinese were able to compete with it yet. However, because of the US-China trade wars, the US pressured the Dutch government into stopping export into Chinese market from ASML. No Trade Commissioner Šefčovič, no President of the Commission von der Leyen were there to stop it. And of course, it's very easy for the US to pressure one Dutch government, unfortunately. If it was together, if it was the EU, not one Dutch government, then of course we could have said something, we could have protected this. Well, we didn't, so now are Chinese more investing into their excellency in lithography because they can't import it from ASML, and we will be losing this sort of edge that we in the European Union have. So my conclusion in this part of the question is that we need to step up our game, otherwise everybody will just sort of take whatever they want from us and we will have nothing left.
And Koray, Markéta has kind of sketched out a little bit here, the importance of semiconductors, computer chips, these things that power the AI revolution, and also a little bit of kind of the interconnected global aspect of it. I know kind of you're a GeoTech senior fellow here at GLOBSEC, as well as kind of chief analyst at KŌSE Advisory. Can you maybe explain for those who don't necessarily know the kind of way in which these computer chips come to be, how interconnected and global that supply chain is?
So when we go back a couple of years, and I would say 35 years, that's where actually the industrial base started to change. We saw de-verticalization because we believed in free markets and we wanted to have shareholder returns to be maximized while innovation was driving and fueling that. At that time, we discovered the Global South and China are really good in manufacturing things that we do not want to manufacture with lower profit margins. So that's where we started the problem. Where this led to is a growth engine for the European, also the Western world, including, of course, the United States, where the economic models totally changed. We're a service economy, we're a technology-driven economy, we're a consumer of that technology. That is a good thing, actually, because we're leading the way. Let's say we led the way. At that time, we did not realize that those core capabilities will actually empower ideologies that do not align with ours, and we disregarded that for a long time. We disregarded that the autocratic playbook does not go by free market dynamics. We also discovered that new materials, and that's more, I think, circumstantial, have been more in those areas like the Global South and China, and rare earth minerals are one critical part of that component where we literally see total dominance of China and a weaponization of that. So we're literally in crisis right now, and I would actually go that far. We are at war right now. And when we're thinking about this war, it's an economic war. And when we start, and Frédéric Bastiat said that, when goods stop crossing borders, soldiers will. So we're now at that point where goods stop crossing borders. We're questioning ourselves if the soldiers will follow. I don't think China is willing to go kinetic. However, they're willing to go and build their nation the way they want, an autocratic nation. And when we recognize that, we cannot put free market dynamics as our solution to the problem because of compliance issues, modern slavery, of environmental concerns. There's a key number. 12% of the Chinese soil is already toxicated. 12% of China. China is not a small country. Would we do that with our soil? We wouldn't. So we need to innovate. And for that, we need to innovate into semiconductors and AI because the sixth Kondratiev cycle where we think about quantum, biotech, AI, and space will run on AI and semiconductors. And if we do not have that intrinsic capability to sustain that supply chain, then we will not succeed. And the reality, unfortunately, is, including ASML, while ASML is a middle piece of the supply chain, even they depend on materials to produce these magnificent machines that do EUV-style lithography. And the sanctions that we thought that would slow down China, they actually amplified China. And it's a paradox. So when we think about the sanctions that we applied in that specific case mentioned, they actually now use deep ultraviolet lithography, which is not yet as great as EUV. Their Huawei chip of 5 nanometers is 20% to 40% less powerful than our chips. But guess what? Their chips do not depend on anything from us. And their growth and development innovation is exponential. My last point on that is they pump out 4.7 million STEM graduates a year. The US did 800,000 and will do less this year because we have some visa issues. You may have heard about that. Now, when we think about the concatenation of that with the European inertia and chest pounding, that Europe is so great, I think we need to do some self-reflection here and understand the fragilities. And to answer your question, that's actually the point where we are right now. We are in the middle of the crisis, we are at war, and we do not have a time frame to think about this that I've heard in the conference a couple of times. Let's look at 10 years and 20 years from now. No, we have 3 to 5 years. That's it. Okay? There is urgency to that, and I think that needs to be really highlighted in this context.
Thank you. And Koray has kind of outlined there, Stuart, and as president of the Utah Senate, you're very welcome here and very grateful to have you. That this is kind of a war and that China is nearshoring or onshoring its entire supply chain. President Trump has said he wants to do something similar. You must be very happy about that.
You know, yeah, it's a big issue. I actually believe that the country or the people who control AI will actually control the world in the future. And I believe back in my days growing up, we were in a nuclear arms race. And that was a race for nuclear power, but right now we're in an AI race. And the country, both economically and militarily, the country that controls AI will control the world. But before I get into some of the things I want to talk about, I'd like to actually, I'm very impressed. This is my second time in Prague, my first time at this conference, and very impressed with the fact that Europe's stepping up. But I think it's important Europe step up, but we also think we step up together. So I'm happy to be here from America, and a lot of people know where Prague is, but they may not know a lot about Utah. So I may just share a few things about Utah. Utah is known as the crossroads of the western United States because it sits in the center of the western United States. Most of the railroads and freeway road systems went through Utah. We are quickly changing from the crossroads of the western United States to the crossroads of the world. And part of that is because we have an airline hub, a Delta hub. Part of it is because you may have heard of Silicon Valley. We have Silicon Slopes. We think Silicon Slopes is much more effective, and because of our tax policy, our regulatory policy, we think hopefully someday we'll eclipse Silicon Valley at Silicon Slopes. We'll host the Winter Olympics, so we have mountains and great quality of life, but a great tech sector. But in addition to that, we've been looked at, and U.S. News and World Report does an analysis every year of all 50 states. They use 70 metrics to try to determine which of the 50 states is most competitive and has the best economy. 3 years ago, they rated Utah number 1. 2 years ago, they rated Utah number 1 against 70 different metrics. And a couple of months ago, they rated Utah number 1 for economic and productivity and quality of life. And we believe that is because of our people and because of our regulatory policy. Another publication, Rich States, Poor States, look at economic outlook, look at the future of states, all 50 states in America. For the 18th year in a row, they've rated Utah number 1 for economic outlook. We think our future is very bright. But one of the challenging things with our future is, again, we believe, and I led a delegation two years ago to Ukraine. We were the only state in America to take a full delegation, 20 people to Ukraine during the middle of the war. And I've been in Bucha. I've stood on the area where the Russians came into Bucha and actually shot men, women, and children, and dug trenches. The people thought they were digging them to fortify the troops, and they dumped people in them. Very brutal and very difficult situation. As I look at what's going on in the world today, the thing that can challenge Utah's economic prosperity and our quality of life, in fact, the world's quality of life, is the lack of our ability to control AI and the future of technology. I think it has a very big impact. We are, again, in an arms race, not a nuclear arms race anymore, but we're in an arms race for AI technology. You see what's happening in Ukraine. We have in Utah, Hill Air Force Base, we are home to the F-35s. We know what F-22s are. We understand stealth fighters and stealth bombers, but that's not what they're using in Ukraine. What's happening, and if you look at the last attack, it's drone technology and AI technology. That is the future, and if we don't dominate that as a free world, we're going to be in trouble.
Which is what makes this so high stakes. And I mean, Derrick, it's interesting. CEOs of NVIDIA and ARM, both US companies, have said in the last week that this idea of kind of Donald Trump closing those routes to China, onshoring all of this stuff, all it's doing is advancing China's technological development. Mm-hmm. They're right, aren't they?
Well, it's a difficult calculus because in the medium and the long term, and I agree with you, we're not talking 10 years here. We've got to onshore rapidly. We've got to the free world, have got to build our own supply chains, build our own sources of critical minerals. We have to deny the most advanced tools to China as well, be that the Dutch company you mentioned, be that NVIDIA itself, which said they lost out on about $2.5 billion in revenue in one quarter. They're expecting $8 billion lost revenues in the second quarter. That's a significant cost, but it's a cost that we have to bear to be able to on the cutting edge of innovation. And so if we medium term build our own supply chains, deny it to China, and then third, we've got to work together as an alliance, and we've got to have trusted partners. We've got to work together so that all of the West together can confront that Chinese threat. I think Europe tends to be a little bit ahead of the U.S. in terms of public sector investment, and of course the U.S. brings a lot of private sector investment to the table, which I would argue can bring even better results. So working together with our different strengths, I think we can confront this challenge, and we've just got to recognize that, yes, we're in a block versus block situation. And Europe and the United States, despite any unpleasantness recently with trade and everything else, in the long term, we're clearly going to be allies. We share so many common values, certainly over and against the Chinese regime, Chinese Communist Party, which uses AI and technology to surveil its own citizens, to enslave them, and to threaten their neighbors. So in my mind, we have to do it. There are costs in the short term, to be sure, to companies, but they have to be paid.
So here are the facts, and hopefully we can all agree that right now, one country controlling 60% of the manufacturing of critical minerals and controlling 95% of the processing of critical minerals, a country that perhaps we don't align with politically or doesn't align with the free world, that is not a future that we want to maintain. And so we have to go to work to try to fix that. And we have to unite among not our differences, but the things we're most concerned about. And we need to step up as a free world and start dealing with critical mineral development, the environmental processes behind it, and the manufacturing of critical minerals. And we see dumping. We had a company in Utah that produced most of the magnesium for the entire United States. Magnesium is used in weapon systems, U.S. magnesium. Because there were dumping of magnesium on the global market, they went out of business. And we need to deal with that because we cannot allow, if the facts are accurate, that 60% of the critical minerals are mined in a country that is not aligned with us, and they process 90 to 95% of them. The free world needs to deal with that, and we can't wait. It needs to be done. It needs to be done now.
And to your point, we can't just use the tools of the free market because we have a competitor, an adversary who doesn't play by those rules. And that's why we have to make an adjustment here so that we do not allow companies like that magnesium company you're talking about to go out of business.
Markéta, I'm intrigued to hear what you think about kind of which way Europe should go here. I mean, we're hearing a lot about the free world, about, I think Stuart said, stepping up together. The EU's not necessarily always been the biggest friend of US big tech companies, has it?
Well, which way should the EU go? That's, of course, well, I slightly touched upon it, but the excellence and the snowball effect, you know, if you are first in AI, you continue being first in AI and snowball all the other technological advancement onto you. It's, as I mentioned, all because the US and China have sort of a potential centralization of power. In the US, it's the single capital market. If you want to influence any sort of tech department, you can through that, you can through various means. In China, of course, it's heavy subsidizing from the Chinese Communist Party, and of course planning of which tech sector will be supported in the next 5 years. So in this regard, it's almost quite natural that the Europe would be quite behind, because we do not have those things, although Europe is the most accused of being the central leading force, but it's just not true. It's not Brussels, it's Berlin, it's Paris, you know, it's partially even Prague. And I feel like we need really to unify this if we want to compete. Of course, there's the decision to be made whether we want that. You know, maybe some European leaders want to be just providers and want to be on the outskirts, because being on the outskirts has also some advantages. You are not out there potentially for any conflicts. And I think we need to mention that there is one boiling conflict that might come into play quite soon, which is, of course, Chinese offensive towards Taiwan. And in that situation, Europe will probably be forced by both US and China to, so to say, pick a side. But we are dependent on both sides, so how can we then pick a side? Morally, it's quite clear, of course, standing behind Taiwan, but we do not have actually assessed the critical dependencies that we have and are not doing anything against them. So this is also another direction that we need to take into account and either change or get used to the fact that we will be played.
Really interesting. And thank you also for your questions coming in on Slido. Please do keep them coming. We're going to get to those in a second. But Koray, I think it's interesting because Markéta just mentioned there the importance of Taiwan. I mean, why is that such a valuable area, not just for China, but also for the US, for Europe, for the entire world?
Well, the area itself is not really valuable, maybe in the context of geographics, because it's very close to mainland China, so we would never be able to, even if the US would at some point claim it as the 51st state, which They will not, of course. But it has the power of manufacturing the most advanced AI chips. We have kind of, in the inertia that we were living, just forgot to do that. And that high dependency creates, of course, almost like a hostage to us in the context of dependency and the ability of China to weaponize that. Again, the autocratic playbook disregards completely the free market in context of everything that probably ideologically matters to us, like freedom of choice, ethical work, labor rights, and all of that. And when we're dealing with that, we lost ourselves to fix their ideology instead of fixing our resilience, unfortunately, in my opinion. Right? We cared more about changing the Chinese mindset of nation building, and in that way, we lost actually our industrial base. And we did not really recognize that loss, because we were, in German we say the Gutmenschen, right? We wanted everybody to be really a good person and care about good things. In fact, China doesn't even really care about the Chinese as much as we would care about Europeans, right? We care about our people. The US cares about freedom. But freedom doesn't come just with economic power, it comes first with security. There is no supply chain that is viable without security. The US has been the guarantor of the security for the Western world for many, many decades. The NATO summit in 2 weeks will be decisive for our future, and China will look at that extremely closely. It is at war with us in the context of Taiwan as well, because it doesn't need to invade Taiwan. I always say China doesn't need to shoot one missile to win the war because it owns the periodic table. It also owns a lot of control in the context of value generation for a lot of our big companies. Mm-hmm. China has been not only the producer, but also consumer for our products. So we have to understand that there is collateral damage, and that collateral damage is going to be very hurtful for a period of time. And how much that collateral damage will be, the longer we wait, the more collateral damage there will be. So when we think about policies, when we think about change, when we think about rearm Europe, we need to think about the money to be invested into the right technology and not fight yesterday's war. Mm-hmm. Yesterday's war was tanks, big, beautiful ships. Well, today's and tomorrow's war will be cyber, will be hybrid, will be drone wars, can shoot down things that we paid for dearly for multi-billion dollars, and they shoot it down with a $10 million invention, right? And that's actually pretty bad when an aircraft carrier loses a plane or two, when something cheap comes across and, you know, we did forget the plane is on the ship and it just fell down, which was, you know, a real case just recently.
Yeah, Derrick, you're nodding along there.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think it was brilliant. And we need to recognize that it wasn't we who entered into this new Cold War. It wasn't us who inspired Putin to invade Ukraine. There's evil in the world, and we need to stand united against it. If you look at China, we spent 20, 50 years, some in that time frame, trying to draw them into this global order, and it's been rejected. It's very clear. My colleague, Michael Pillsbury, wrote a book called The 100-Year Marathon. Had we been watching and listening carefully to their ideology and to how they were talking about building their country, we would have recognized that they were playing along for a time. I think companies are seeing this. I hear from multinational companies, US and others, all the time, who are in China for a time. Maybe for a time it's even profitable. For example, look at General Motors. After all, Mao drove a Buick. They had some cachet. They were selling a lot of cars for a time, but they're not really anymore. Look at what's happening in Europe with the Chinese EVs coming across the border, thanks to large subsidies from the Chinese government. We just have to recognize that they're playing in a mercantilist world. We, the free world, don't have to atomize into our own countries, but we do need to work together as a free world, as a trading bloc, We need to work together on technology transfers. We need to make sure that we're not allowing the most advanced tools to get to China. We just have to recognize that's the world we live in, even if it's not the world we would like to be in.
Stuart?
Maybe if I may very quickly comment on that, like, because we talk about tax fractures, what I'm totally with you, where they have never actually played or bought into the free market.
Right.
They have weaved micro regulations, and we're now at the point where if you're a company from the outside and you want to operate in China and you have any touch with the government, which every company requires anyways, you have to run your entire tech stack on Alibaba, right? So they are decoupling anyways.
Right.
For us, it comes as a surprise that, oh, we need to decouple from China? Why is that? Well, because they're already decoupling themselves. So to your point, we did not start that. We did not want that. And we kind of need to get over the point that we are in it and realize that. So the self-reflection comes there as well.
Well said.
So that's interesting. So, I mean, Stuart, I think it's worth kind of dwelling a little bit more on that. We already know that China has been supplying us for a long time. They have some of this knowledge. I think, Koray mentioned Alibaba. Their CEO, I think, said this week that they believe a year behind in terms of chip development, but they always catch up pretty quickly. How do we square that challenge then of we need to cut off the limb while also saying, if we're in a US context, kind of making America great again could make China even greater?
Yeah. In addition to the regulatory burdens that China places on companies doing business there, we regulate and make a real bureaucratic process upon ourselves. We talked about critical minerals. Critical minerals exist in the free world. We just aren't producing them. Utah has 40 of the 50 critical minerals needed. And when you talk about technology, you can't have AI technology without data centers. And you can't have data centers without power. We in the free world have basically restricted the expansion of power. It's been very difficult to be able to, in fact, I would say the free world has an extreme deficit of power generation right now. Mm-hmm. We've had, in my office in Utah, I've had probably 10 or 20 data centers come in wanting, a gig of power. A gig of power is an immense amount of power that's needed to be able to power these big data centers. And that power doesn't exist in America. It doesn't exist, I think, in the free world. It doesn't exist in Utah. We are making a concerted effort in Utah to try to reduce those regulatory processes that restrict the ability for us to develop nuclear. We're looking at smart nuclear, we're looking at small nuclear reactors, we're looking at actually trying to make Utah the nuclear capital of the world with microreactors that actually fit on the back of a semi-truck that can be transported and dropped into place very, very, very safe, to be able to allow them to be tied together, daisy-chained together, to be able to produce power for AI technology. We're looking at hydropower, we're looking at geothermal, we're actually continuing to use coal, clean coal and processes, natural gas. We cannot let, in my opinion, and we have an excess amount of natural gas, we cannot let Europe, Germany be dependent on Russia for their energy production or their supplies. We need to step up as a free world to try to make sure we have those supply line dependencies, but also energy dependencies to be able to compete. I lived through COVID, and the regulatory processes that I experienced during COVID and the supply chain interruptions that we found during COVID, we cannot let happen again. So, yeah, we have a challenge, but I think part of that challenge is trying to reduce the regulatory processes we put upon ourselves to be able to unleash the power of the free world, the power of capitalism, to be able to solve those problems. And sometimes we are our worst enemies because of the regulatory burdens we put on ourselves.
Well, I hope that anybody that's sat here and thought, well, I don't need to pay attention to tech or anything like that has now been convinced otherwise. I think it's worth bringing in some of the Slido questions now, because I think we've kind of danced a little bit around the regulatory questions. There's one here that asks, in your opinion, what are the key EU regulations that have to change to allow the continent to make progress in reducing dependencies? Markéta, if I can maybe come to you as our kind of European parliamentary representative, what do you think to that?
Well, I slightly mentioned already that we in the EU actually do not know where do we have the critical dependencies. And that's one of the first regulations that I would think of, because this is something that the Internal Market Committee tried to push for the last European Parliament's mandate, so I'd say around 2021. And it did not go through the Council of the EU because the member states blocked it. What was, let's say, the goal was to actually, exactly as I mentioned, assess where do we have those dependencies and then enroll some sort of plan on resolving those. And even this, even just sort of saying, let's have a plan, did not go through the member states. So, you know, I can mention many other potential EU regulation that would reduce dependencies, but I think that we need to address the elephant in the room, which is the wall made by member states in terms of doing something about it. And that's why I already several times mentioned the unification of the single market and the creation of the capital market, and of course some other reforms per se, such as the veto in the Council of the EU, because otherwise we will not have the unified voice that actually wants to do something for protection of the EU. We will only have the 27 plus individual voices that can't really do much, but are somehow potentially protecting their own interests. And allow me just a quick example again, because I was working on a CHIPS Act, and if anybody read the CHIPS Act, it's horrible, it sucks. There's no money in it, and it's absolutely pointless. Why is it? Because we tried to do something in the parliament, because immediately lobbyists from Netherlands and from Germany, but Netherlands mostly, which is a very small country. But they have, of course, as we already mentioned, ASML and the other great technological, advanced companies. They came and said, well, you want to bring here investors to create more factories, but that would be a competition to us. We don't want that. And they blocked it completely. One country, well, a small country, and advancement in investments in chips, the most important thing that we need in Europe. Thank you, NVIDIA, by the way, for progressing at least somewhere. But this needs to change. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Derrick, can I maybe ask you to address another question, which is
Sure.
this one about kind of the similarities between EU and US regulation, and maybe where in the Venn diagram those operate. And in the meantime, I'm hoping that our erstwhile microphone operators might be able to come to this gentleman next. Basically, you know, where are those regulatory similarities between the US and the EU, and how can we kind of build on them to advance our economies in both ways?
Yeah, we've got plenty of house cleaning to do on our side of the Atlantic on our regulatory state, particularly environmental regulations, which empower litigation. It is America, after all. We got to give our lawyers something to do. So we just sue all the time, and that's terrible. It slows down the process to build the new power that you were talking about, Mr. President, which I agree with everything you said there. Absolutely brilliant. We have to do that. But I think the biggest regulatory elephant in the room is the net zero policies. And as long as we push in that direction, we're going to have more and more reliance issues on China, which dominates the renewable energy technologies, electric vehicles in particular. We're going to endanger good jobs like in this part of Europe that build internal combustion engines, for example. At the same exact time when the United States is producing more oil and gas than it ever has before, where there's great resources in the North Sea if nations here would be willing to utilize them. As long as we push toward that, we're going to hamstring ourselves. We're going to continue to deindustrialize because the price of energy is going to be way, way too high. And to fully understand that, again, we have to recognize the world that we live in. China is not concerned about the environment. They say some of the right things about it, but what do? They continue to build coal power plants all over the country. Multiple times of how many total coal plants there are in the US, they're building every year. It's completely subsuming anything that we're trying to do in the US to reduce emissions. So as long as they are doing that, and I can guarantee you that those coal plants aren't using the best technologies like they would be if one were to be built in the US or into Europe. So we're really hamstringing ourselves as long as we pursue that path. I think in the United States, we're taking firm steps away from that agenda. It's not just President Trump, but even on the left-hand side of the political spectrum in the US, there's a recognition that we have to have affordable and reliable electricity. We see the things that happened in Spain, where my son was living, studying abroad, and had blackouts because of an unreliable electric grid. So we have to temper our enthusiasm for that by making sure we have a reliable and affordable fuel supply.
Stuart, Koray, you're both nodding along there. Anything either of you want to add to that?
So, on the regulation side, I think the US is extremely good. Second place in the world from the bottom. Only Zambia and mining takes 34 years. The US takes between 27 to 29 years from ideation to first product out. The Europeans are very similar, 15 to 20 years. Often the reason is like, some species living somewhere there, and we need to protect that at all cost. And what I'm trying to maybe allude to is it's time to reprioritize and recalibrate what is important to us. And while I often reminisce about the issues that we're having, I also want to be positive about the capabilities that we have. So, and we have proven that in the free market. For instance, when we were talking about sustainability, and there was a question about CBAM, right? And we talk about renewable energy certificates, that the market actually pumps money into it and trade always is more fruitful than, let's say, expenditures into something with subsidies. And when we're thinking about rare earth minerals, a governance of rare earth minerals under the umbrella of national security would be something that would help us, at least in the time frame of recalibration and reordering our supply chains. What that means is that we go as governments and go into those supply chains and, yes, to some extent stockpile and then trade it back into the industry. Because a government, in anything it does it worse than the private sector, in anything. Okay, that's my strong belief. Like Milton Friedman says, there are only certain things that government should and need to do, and those are minimal, right? And governing business is none of that. And I worked at the Federal Reserve, I can tell you, okay? Doing processes there is painful. So when we think about the second thing on this as a recommendation, is really emerging that entrepreneurial spirit and the innovation power that we have. 27 different minds have 27 different ideas. Not all of them will be in alignment, but why are we not harnessing it and we just hit each other over the head all the time? And then we do that forever and we never come to a result. So I think when we agree on the problem, the solution power that the transatlantic relationship has over 100 years solved the worst things that happened to our societies, and it will solve this one too. So in this case, it needs to become a transatlantic technology regulation. Right? It's not just the EU regulation. The EU AI Act, in my opinion, is nonsense. Yeah, the only thing it does is actually protects your privacy. Okay, great. So let's call it the AI Act. It has nothing to do really with AI other than your personal information protection. So, and there is no safe haven agreement either. So the data needs to flow between the US and Europe. It's not flowing right now. And it's not flowing because of things like GDPR and all of that. So we need to actually release a little bit of that data, because data literally is the new oil for AI. Unless we want to drill, baby, drill, and let's go, right? I mean, that's not a bad thing either, but for the period of time, of course. But there are like steps, really concrete steps for the EU and the US to collaborate on. The worst thing is alienate each other. And I think the UK plays a very good bridge in that. I don't know what happened to Keir, but Keir changed quite a bit from when he got elected to where he is right now. And honorary Tobias Albert is here as well. You know him very well as well. So I think we need to be positive and optimistic, and we need to engage, and we need to break down some of those barriers, because the EU is regulatory champion #2 in the world, and the US is proudly #1. So how about we change that a little bit?
Stuart, anything?
Yeah, just maybe add to that. In fact, I actually wrote something down and that President Zelensky said, but I never thought in my lifetime, having studied World War II and what happened here in Europe during World War II, I really didn't think that I'd see tanks going across a border again into another country in my lifetime. That was a vision that I just didn't think. I thought that was ancient history in my mind. And seeing what's happening in the world right now, and you see what's happening in Israel, Hamas, even Iran overnight, we live in a different world today. And President Zelensky said something. He said, Operation Spiderweb, and I wrote this down, such a strike would never have been imaginable without technology. No country, and I would say the free world, not only no country, can afford to stay behind in technology. In Utah, we're trying to focus on 3 things. And we believe it's a national and a world security issue. And we're trying to we want to be a pilot program. We're asking Congress to reduce those regulations you talked about for Utah so that we can show how to responsibly develop critical minerals and not only mine, but actually process critical minerals, that we can show how to develop energy, whether it's nuclear, again, hydro or geothermal, but we want to be able to provide the nuclear power for data centers. We have the lowest electric rates, the lowest energy prices in the United States and Utah, both natural gas and electricity. We can show the world how to produce energy at a very reasonable price and environmentally sound, and to be able to develop AI technology, because again, I will say that the country or the area of the world that controls AI will control the world in the future, both militarily and economically, and we need to step up to be able to solve that as a free world. And hopefully we can join with Europe in a collaborative effort to be able to come together to try to make sure that our supply chains in the free world work together and we aren't dependent on ideological countries that don't align with us.
We're on the home straight now. You've been very, very patient, so I'm grateful for it. If we can, all of us try and rattle through some of these.
Thank you very much indeed. Tobias Selwood, former defense minister. And I'm marking those words. Whoever controls AI controls the world. And that's the message that's come from me. This is a security conference. Some of us have been coming in for many years, and the digital plane is now taking over. Absolutely right. Mm-hmm. So my charge to you, and sir, you say you're actually making more power to create the data banks in order to enhance AI. That suggests we're still on a journey. From my perspective, from where I sit, the harnessing of AI is a 5-year race. This is an arms race that will be concluded in the next 5 years with quantum computing. And if we lose that, it's game-changing. So my question to you all, sirs and madam, is to say, should there not be a Manhattan-style project that brings together all the collaboration, all the capability, the academics, as well as the commercial and the governments, to say we need to inject every effort possible, because otherwise we lose this, it will be existential?
And my answer is absolutely yes. And we are asking for that in Utah from the United States government. We see this as an unbelievably critical issue that can't be lost. So that's my answer, yes.
Maybe one caveat, Tobias, on that is that unfortunately, the mindset of the Manhattan Project is very hard to push today because government believes that government should manage. And the Manhattan Project was government initiated and private sector executed. And if we can get to that point that even the EU Commission and all the 27 states in Europe, plus the United States government says, we will be hands off, then I would say, absolutely, let's have a go at it. But if we don't do that and we live again this pipe dream of Manhattan Project government-led, then we're going to be busy, but we're not going to be doing any business. So that's my point.
Agreed. I just agree with that. Yeah.
May I add one point? Well, I don't want to be the pessimist on the panel, but I truly am, apparently, because I just don't see it. I am European focused on defense, and although we have a huge geopolitical shift and a huge adversary on our borders, we are not capable of bringing 27 member states together for a proper common European defense. And that's something that most convention leaders understand, because as the conventional arms race, etc., I don't see the knowledge base, the capacity, and the political will to do this in terms of tech race, in terms of AI. Because most of the people who are decision makers in the top executive positions don't even understand AI. There was one question regarding the big beautiful bill and the US and AI. The European Union itself does not have an AI Act that would address this. The AI Act is just about human rights, when you go to work, so that your application is not processed by AI. That's not protecting us. So we don't have that, and I think we need to address it and know it.
Yeah, and very quickly, I'll just maybe spin off of that. In Utah, we passed regulation that actually allows for regulators to be embedded with the developers to be able to facilitate faster speeds in AI development, but to do it in a responsible way that doesn't create some of the challenge we've seen even with some of the internet or just social media. So we're working on that, and we have a model we're happy to share.
I think that conversations like this one will help us get there. So it's ones that we should definitely talk about over lunch. And please do stay in your seats because we do have the program continuing here with the last but not least session today on the topic of public-private synergies in Central and Eastern European critical infrastructure. But please, when you do so, and while we leave the stage, give a round of applause to our brilliant panel here.